Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the ThreeCameramen podcast. As always, I am joined by Daniel.
Hello.
And in a shocking turn of events, I am once again joined by Finley.
Hello.
Have you been, Finley, after all this time?
I've been well, yeah.
Been well,
And
yeah.
with some film revision and all that. So
Oh,
I'm ready
fantastic.
To get into this.
What I like to hear. That's great news.
Yeah.
And in today's podcast, we will be analysing Duncan Jones's Moon. It's a 2009 British sci-fi film. The director actually being the son of David Bowie. He's also directed Source Code and Mute and Warcraft, I want to say. And like with our previous podcasts, this will be more of an analysis than a review. So, as with, I should probably elaborate. This film is what we study, and we have to compare it to We Need to Talk About Kevin, which we did in last week's episode. And the main specialist focus for both of these films is ideology and narrative. Now, I'll start us off with one of the main ideologies in the film, and the idea of nature versus nurture. And we have to see how this ideology and other ideologies, I guess, are better understood or helps us better understand the narrative and the narrative techniques and choices chosen by Jones. And with nature versus nurture, it is very closely linked to Levi Strauss's binary opposition. And it's mainly expressed through the sort of distinction between old Sam, I'll call him old Sam, and new Sam. Old Sam is a very clearly disheveled, near-death clone, and new Sam is a healthier, if more volatile clone. And I'm wondering if one of you two want to elaborate more on that ideology.
Yeah, I suppose I could expand quite nicely on your binary opposition theory in the way that the two personalities of Sam 1 and Sam 2 are quite kind of polar opposite. In the first instance, you have the older Sam, who's obviously a lot more calm. He's kind of come to peace with himself over the 3 years, and he's definitely been affected by his environment in that way. And you see his very calm nature through his kind of caring of the plant and stuff like that on the space station. And then you have the newer Sam, who's definitely more arrogant and I'd say quite volatile in the way he acts towards the older Sam as well.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think also we see some more binary opposition between, I think you could even argue between the moon and the earth. I would say this may be a bit of a bold assumption or bold interpretation, but I believe the moon, in a sense, because throughout the film, there's like these sort of establishing shot interludes, you could say, of either the earth dominating the shots and the moon just in the corner, or the moon dominating the shot and the earth in the corner. And you could argue that it's sort of inferring an opposition by suggesting that the moon is sort of, I guess, has more humanity and earth represents capitalism in a sense, because usually you see the earth enlarged when there's the characters being affected by capitalism, and the moon enlarged where they're showing a bit more humanity. Maybe me reading into it a bit too much, but you'll see some binary opposition between Lunar Industries and Sam. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I was gonna say the industries and Sam.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
How Sam is a hard-working individual who's basically doing all the hard work for this Lunar Productions, and Lunar Productions are someone who just feeds off Sam and complete the opposite, not really doing any of the hard work and making money out of that. And then that can link to the theme of the ideology of capitalism, and how Lunar Productions see Sam as replaceable, and that he's just used for the money, and then he gets nothing out of it. and Lunar Productions gets everything out of it. You can especially see that in the opening scene when you see the montage of the of Lunar Production,
Oh yeah,
and you
yeah.
see how it's just they've glorified their company as if they're all for this ethnic, they're showing these ethnic groups and showing everyone all happy and everything like that, but they don't show the full picture, I don't think.
Yeah.
And
I'd
the
say
technical side of it.
That's also sort of linked to Marxism. Did you mention capitalism, Finley? Or yeah, so Marxism, a very Marxist view on capitalism, in that these you could argue lower down workers like Sam are basically just tools for the benefit of the middle and upper class that you could say is Earth. The film plays with capitalism a little bit, giving mainly reasons against, but also slight reasons for Sam Bell being in the position he is, or the clone of Sam Bell. Against is definitely, we see the visual effects on old Sam of how capitalism has basically ruined him, and how he's a shell of his former self. But then you see, then you could infer, well, actually, by just being clones, it's saving a lot of human cost and preventing a lot of lost lives on Earth. And if it was just multiple people coming back to the space station, that increases the risk of failure and death, etc.
Yeah, I'd say along the Marxist kind of capitalist route, kind of linking it back in with the opening sequence, you have a lot of kind of cyclical images, or kind of like a motif. So you have the sun, obviously, and the earth and the moon and the diagrams of those. But then you've also got Ferris wheels and crop circles, and that kind of those kind of cyclical images also kind of imply like a never-ending sort of workforce. So how you have these constant revolutions of workers as they're kind of employed by big businesses. They do their time, then die basically, and it's kind of this never-ending cycle of capitalism. But then if you want to link it to narrative also, which is our focus for this one, you can say that also the film kind of takes a cyclical structure, is in that each clone is still being churned out one after the other, even every 3 hours or whatever. Not 3 hours, 3 years. So I suppose that's quite interesting, kind of showing the cyclical narrative from the beginning. And definitely how this is kind of a never-ending cycle for Sam, and how it'll always be some sort of suffering.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I guess you could argue, well, no, not to argue. I guess this also very much ties in with the idea or ideology of determinism. It's a sort of philosophy that free will is an illusion. Sam thinks, previously, Sam has always thought he had free will. And this has always been shattered by the fact he ends up dead. Basically, each clone ends up incinerated in one way or another. And determinism is basically saying illusion, choice is an illusion. And that is, you could argue, Sam's fate, or the clones of Sam, is to constantly die for Lunar Industries so that the Earth can carry on thriving. And while it makes the case that determinism is very present throughout our main characters, it also suggests that this philosophy can be broken, because one, Sam does escape, but then he ends up in an intense legal battle, which we never see the results of, even in the cameo he has in Duncan Jones's sort of spiritual sequel, Mute. You could argue the fact he's ended up in that state, his outcome, despite his choices to escape, is roughly the same. He's still trapped by this company, whether it be legally or on the moon. So it's
another thing
very
about
existential.
that is the idea of kind of false promises as well. So in the beginning sequence as well, you have the kind of promise of this healthier Earth with 70% of the world, even though it only shows America, using 70% of this new helium-3 energy. And then you've also got the false promises Sam is given, like a return to his life, a return to his wife. And then later on he finds out she's dead, and those false promises are taken away. And because that's the only thing keeping him going, he eventually decides to sacrifice himself just to give the original Sam more time to go home.
And that is definitely a I guess plot point in the theme or ideology of the value of human life. I feel like Jones suggests that despite them being basically robots or like just clones of like exact replicas of the original Sam, they still have the same, if not more, humanity than the original, because they have gone through so much experience to, I guess, gain a higher understanding and awareness of humanity. And that therefore makes them more real and more sympathetic as characters. And then this also ties in with the ideology of slave labor or isolation being used, I guess, held against your will. Like you could argue there was a point of choice for Sam, but these clones are being held against their will to do the work for Lunar Industries, and this sort of entrapment is very much represented through the establishing shots that establish the distance between Moon and the Earth. It's like the Moon being the sort of personal prison for Sam that he will never be able to escape until he does escape, tying in with the sort of rejection of determinism.
I mean, the idea that they're both clones of each other kind of poses a question where they have a soul as well, and that kind of that theme of identity is explored in how kind of real they feel to themselves, kind of how true they are to themselves. And then you obviously have these personalities that grow out of that. So it's kind of, because there's a lot of philosophy in real life that can link to it, and how humans see themselves anyway. So it's kind of like I think it's like a mirror. It's called the mirror stage, where you kind of have a lot of self-reflection when you see yourself, and you know what you can do. So when Sam comes face to face with this kind of version of himself, basically mirror image, he starts to reflect a lot on his decisions, and therefore they kind of they bounce off each other a lot, like the binary opposition, like the yin yang sort of thing. So you have the one Sam who's very hot-headed but learns to kind of control his anger and not like judge himself so harshly, and then the second Sam who develops a lot of compassion for the other clone in the situation he's been put in, and stuff like that.
You also see that binary opposition again in the dream sequence that I think old Sam has, and that's sort of old Sam reaching out to the original Sam under the bed sheets of their family home. It's a very surreal and almost nightmarish dream that he has. And there are many different interpretations of this that I have. One basic one is just like this, like sort of the overflux of memories of all the previous Sams who have been there are sort of all like sleeping and sinking into one another to make this like sort of nightmare for Sam. But then it also is representative of these clones trying to reach civilization and regain their humanity and to get the normal life that they deserve. I think you said with their identity that they are trying to find and do have, it's about them trying to regain that place in society that they definitely deserve, but never get due to these corrupt monopolizing companies like Lunar Industries. Also, I think it's also worthy to note that Sam, the clones of Sam, are very often gaslighted in the film. They're forced, like, they're fed lies by even Gertie, who eventually admits it, but fed lies by Lunar Industries about things like why new Sam couldn't remember how he got onto the hospital bed because it was just down to memory loss. And then you see him repeat, oh yeah, it was memory loss. And then you realized that all these clones have ever been told is pure lies. You see that with the video messages. You see that with the hospitals. You see that with the crashes. All of these things are what they have been like told to know, and when they get shattered, it leaves a more devastating effect for both of these Sams. And I think that's very much an indicator of the corruption of these companies.
I think the context of this film is another good thing to kind of explore, especially with kind of how this kind of changed the science fiction genre itself. So even though it's a small independent sci-fi film with only a budget of 5 million, I think it roughly doubled its budget at the box office. And it's obviously had a lot of effect on kind of society as a whole. So they've used a NASA lectures to explore the idea of
it's very scientifically accurate, I think.
Yeah,
well, not I think it is. Helium-3 is a genuine thing that's on the moon that could be harvested to supply energy. That's a genuine thing that could happen.
So they kind of explored all this technology that was in the film, even made using miniatures, but they've explored how possible it is in real life. And you kind of have that comparison between Duncan Jones creating all these miniatures in real life for the film, and then Sam Bell creating his miniature village in the thing, which then eventually gets destroyed.
I was about to link it to that, actually. So I was thinking those miniatures are sort of representative, again, with the dream of him trying to gain a bit of humanity in this very sterilized environment that is the space station, or moon station, or whatever it's called. And when they get shattered, it's sort of breaking that illusion of free will and a promise of a peaceful life after being on this mission for 3 years. And again, like I said before, it leaves a more profound and devastating effect on these characters. And it's also worth noting with the director, his other films, I haven't seen Mute, but I know you have. I've seen Source Code. They are very similar. They are very similar to like the theme of like, or not theme, the genre of like these philosophical science fiction films. I think Source Code is also worth noting for this because it also deals with a man who is unconsciously working for a company against his will. And this sort of Marxist theme that is consistent throughout his entire body of work. I haven't seen, I doubt that's the same in Warcraft, but I could be proved wrong. And I haven't seen Mute. Is it capitalist in any way? Or?
Mute is well, let's just say it deals with the idea of non-consent. I don't know how far that links to capitalism, but
I guess it could be. I need to know more about it, I guess. But the fact he's David Bowie's son, who also went against like sort of the norms of society, whatever. And I guess I don't know how political Bowie was. I am familiar with most of his work, but I wasn't that involved with his politics or whatever. But I would say Jones is very good at subtly and subtly and overtly exploring these ideas and ideologies which of capitalism and nature versus nurture and everything else we just mentioned. The score by Clint Mansell is a pretty, I found, quite iconic score. I think its simplicity speaks volumes in a sense, because it's just these very simple and haunting piano notes that are recurring throughout the entire story, and it has this whole cyclical structure throughout the film, how it keeps on repeating itself, very much linked with the cyclical narrative and the circular imagery. Getting this sort of theme of like circles and determinism and free will being broken. The start of the film with the sort of very fake infographic from Lunar Industries, the music between the infographic and the first scene transitions seamlessly from a very upbeat and enticing soundtrack or instrumental to these ominous notes that immediately set the atmosphere and tone for the rest of the film, and sort of gives a suggestion that Lunar Industries is not who they say they are, and we should definitely expect a revelation to come, and that sets up an enigma code that will have a better payoff later on in the story. So the editing in this film has like really seamless.
I just wanted to compliment the editing in this film, because the fact they managed to get two Sams.
Oh yeah,
you know,
it's
same actor,
seamless.
same room.
It's seamless.
Playing table tennis together, one another.
I know. Yeah.
The perfection on that is beyond. The
I will
fight scene is
say,
noticeable on a lower budget.
Yeah, that was going to bring up. Sam Rockwell does a fantastic performance in this film, but I will say when they have the argument scene, you know, when he says like, I can't think of the exact line. He's sort of like just the new Sam's insulting the old Sam, and it just seems a bit the way it's edited, like just the reaction shots for both Sams and the inserts, or whatever. It does seem a bit like out of place. It grows me every time I watch it, because the first time I watched it, I didn't like it, but now I'm like, especially because
we talk about Kevin.
I feel like it was a bit too enigmatic for me at the start, because I didn't like when I first watched it. It was a bit too like, it just like the whole film is like a dream. There's a lot of, you know, fades to black which obscure the time of the film, and like of crossfades and the visions, and it sort of makes you, you know, just think about what's real and what's not. And this sort of disconnect that this evokes didn't work for me the first time, but on multiple rewatches, it does work for me. I think it's a film that demands multiple rewatches, not only to get this full like dream-like state it's trying to achieve, but also fully understand its themes and the basic ideas that it's trying to evoke.
And this film encourages an active spectatorship, which is quite interesting. The viewer's still working out a sort of enigma. You can't exactly just sit back and take in a narrative, because you still got to work out how the clone features work, and because it's all told through Sam Bell's point of view, you're kind of going along the journey with him, and you're exploring this narrative as it progresses. So even though it's a linear narrative, you're still going along this enigma with Sam, and you're still on his journey.
For a film that came out in 2009, the CGI is actually pretty fantastic. But there's a shot of Sam coming in from one of the missions, and Gertie's traveling to go meet him. That is very obviously CGI. And the rovers, I think, are a mixture of CGI and practical. There's a shot of, at the very start of the film, in the opening sequence, when Sam first walks out to the garage where the rover is. I think that's very obviously CGI. Then as he goes in that close-up, that's definitely a practical vehicle they've built or partially built. No, it's not a set. It's a. I doubt that entire car is a set, but that.
Well, there were loads of mini sets made for it.
Oh yeah, obviously, yeah.
Sections
definitely.
of the.
Which is very reminiscent of Blade Runner and Ridley Scott's use of miniatures for the dystopian landscapes of the futuristic LA. And that definitely gives the film a very, like, especially with the miniatures we see, gives the film a very retro feel, which is very reminiscent of these old films, and sort of brings it into the modern day, which is really exciting. But what was I saying? Oh yeah, and the CGI seamless. You have these very idyllic shots of the moon landscape. It's a beautiful landscape, and when compared to the stock footage we see from the Lunar Industries video, it makes it look almost more beautiful than the Earth at some points, which is quite a hard thing to achieve. But you get all these lens flares, and it's really, really enticing. Speaking of the lighting, it's often very high key, especially in the interior. And I think you might have mentioned it earlier with the sterilized environment. It very much exposes the very clinical sets that they're on, and it's also to sort of expose the more technological aspects and the more corrupt side to the story and the ideology. Is there anything else you want to build on with the cinematography? Or
no, it did look pretty good. I like how Sam, before the clone wakes up, he's often framed on his own in the frame, or he's like quite obscured. So in one of the first shots, you just have him on the treadmill, but then you also have Gertie going across the frame, so you never get to see Sam fully. Or in the other ones, he's kind of put into the corner, showing kind of his insignificance in the grand scheme of things with Lunar Industries and the rest of the kind of corruption and the cover up going on by this evil corporation. And I suppose the idea of this evil corporation having owned or having this much power, it's more kind of a cyberpunk sort of theme, I'd say. So you have like Blade Runner with Terrell and lots of other cyberpunk work deals with the idea of the global corporation.
I think all Ridley Scott sci-fi films deal with that. Alien and Blade Runner, and I haven't seen Prometheus or anything like that, but I assume it's very similar. You mentioned about the way they obscure Sam in the frame whenever he's, I guess, introduced from either be waking up as a clone or in the story. You have that shot of the first time we see new Sam. It's like sort of rack focus between his eyes and his lips waking up, and it's sort of like this sort of robot booting up. It's a very robotic effect that indicates the artificiality of this person we're seeing. And that's the example of what you were mentioning just now. And I think on that bombshell, it's time to end the podcast. You may have wondered where Finley was for half of that. He had to leave, unfortunately. But he might. Yeah,
so he got a call from his producer saying that his film idea has been greenlit, which is quite cool.
Oh, no way!
So he's making a film on the whole lawsuit between him and ThreeCameramen. I think he's going to be like kind of in the vein of Social Network. I think they managed to attach David Fincher to it as well, which is pretty impressive. So I think
is he the writer then? Is he the writer then?
Yeah. And he had to go off and kind of finalize the contract for the film, which is why I had to leave.
I might apply to be the cinematographer then. Actually, that sounds like a good thing to do. Yeah.
I mean, if David Fincher isn't needed, I could always direct. So.
Oh yeah, or I could direct.
Oh no, you're a cinematographer.
No. I have you. Zack and I did both.
Thank you guys for watching. This has been the ThreeCameramen or the TwoCameramen.
Actually, no. But before we leave, we didn't review it, but out of 10, how are you gonna rate this, Daniel?
I would give it a solid 8 out of 10 for Moon. I like this film, and it's much better than We Need to Talk About Kevin.
Yeah. So as I said, this film grows on me with every watch. Right now, it's around like a 7 out of 10. I could see it going to an 8 at some point in the future, but who knows? And on that note, we'll end it here. So yeah, Finley's film will be coming out in the near future, depending on the production schedule and the release date.
December 2022 release date.
2022, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that might change with COVID.
Yeah, because he needs to get all the CGI and everything.
Oh yeah, cool.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot of CGI as well.
Yeah, because I'm not starting the film. He has to pay me for that. Exactly. He's actually like a digital replica of us.
I think he is. Yeah.
We'll have to be behind the camera for that one.
Technology. Though.
Yeah, well, it's like like Luke Skywalker and the Mandalorian.
Quite exciting.
Yeah, and yeah, thank you for watching. See you next time.
Adios.
Bye.